The gunshot echoed through Vulture City's dusty Main Street, freezing Beatrice Taylor in her tracks, the sound of hooves and wagon wheels clattering to a halt behind her. Blood splattered the wooden sidewalk where a man had fallen just moments before another victim of the lawless Arizona Territory of 1879. She clutched her carpetbag tighter, steeling herself against the shock as townsfolk scattered for safety. This wasn't how she'd imagined her arrival, but nothing about the past year had gone according to plan. Beatrice forced herself to keep walking, stepping carefully around the growing crimson pool. She'd traveled too far to turn back now, and showing weakness in a place like this could be fatal. The scorching June heat beat down mercilessly as she made her way toward the weathered sign of the Prospector's Rest Hotel, the only establishment on the street that didn't appear to be a saloon or gambling hall. "You might want to wait a spell, miss," called a gruff voice from the shadowed porch of the general store. "Marshal'll be here soon to sort this mess out." She ignored the warning, pressing forward with determined steps. The dead man's business was none of hers, and she had her own troubles to contend with. 6 days of travel from Denver had left her exhausted, filthy, and desperate for a real bed. More importantly, she needed to establish herself quickly if her plans were to succeed. Inside the hotel, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from his ledger, his eyebrows rising in surprise at the sight of a young woman traveling alone. "Room for one," Beatrice said, placing a carefully counted sum on the counter. "For a week to start." "Certainly, miss," the clerk replied, his curious gaze traveling over her travel-worn dress and the smudges of dust on her face. "May I ask what brings you to Vulture City? We don't get many unaccompanied ladies." "I'm not unaccompanied," she lied smoothly. "My brother will be joining me shortly. He's arranged for me to take the teaching position at the school." The lie came easily, practiced over miles of travel. There was no brother, and as far as she knew, no teaching position either. But she needed time to assess the town, to find opportunity without appearing desperate. "Teacher, you say? Well now, that's fortunate indeed. The children here have been without proper schooling since Miss Holloway left us last winter. Married a rancher from Prescott, she did." He handed her a key. "Room 7, top of the stairs. Basin and pitcher inside. Bathhouse out back costs extra. Meals served at 7, noon, and 6. Beatrice nodded her thanks and climbed the narrow staircase, her legs trembling with fatigue. The room was sparse but clean: a narrow bed, washstand, small writing desk, and a window overlooking the main street. Below, she could see men gathered around the body, a tall figure in a leather vest directing the removal. She sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself a moment of doubt. 22 years old, alone in mining country, with just $43 to her name and a handful of forged reference letters. It wasn't what her parents had envisioned for their only daughter, but they were gone now, along with the comfortable Boston life she'd once known. "I will succeed," she whispered to the empty room. "Whatever it takes." By morning, word had spread that Vulture City's new schoolteacher had arrived. Beatrice dressed in her most respectable attire, a high-necked navy dress with minimal wear at the cuffs, and prepared to meet the town council. If she could convince them to hire her before they could verify her credentials, she might have a fighting chance. The town hall was a modest building nestled between the assayer's office and the Land Claims Bureau. Inside, 3 men awaited her: the mayor, a portly gentleman with an impressive mustache; the mine owner, whose weathered face reflected decades under the harsh Arizona sun; and a younger man she hadn't expected, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a marshal's badge. "Miss Taylor," the mayor greeted her. "I'm Horatio Fleming, mayor of this fine community. This is Emmett Wallace, owner of the Prosperity Mine, and Marshal Brent Galloway, who keeps our peace." The marshal's cool blue eyes studied her with an intensity that made her uneasy. He nodded curtly but offered no smile. "Gentlemen," she replied with a practiced poise that belied her nervousness, "I'm pleased to meet you. I understand Vulture City is in need of a teacher." "Indeed we are," Fleming confirmed, "though we were expecting correspondence before your arrival. The position requires certain qualifications." Beatrice withdrew her letters from her reticule. 4 years at the Hartford Ladies' Academy, followed by teaching positions in Boston and most recently Denver. "I'm proficient in mathematics, literature, history, and basic sciences. I also offer instruction in proper elocution and deportment for young ladies." The fabrications flowed naturally now, stories she'd crafted from fragments of truth and imagination. She had attended school in Boston, though her education had ended when her father's investments collapsed, followed quickly by his health. Fleming skimmed the letters, nodding approvingly. "Very impressive, Miss Taylor. We've approximately 20 children of school age, though attendance is irregular. The position pays $30 monthly with lodging in the rooms behind the schoolhouse, better than she'd hoped. That would be quite satisfactory." Only Marshal Galloway seemed unmoved, his expression guarded as he asked, "What brings someone with your qualifications to a rough mining town like Vulture City, Miss Taylor?" The question struck too close to truth. "Fresh opportunities, Marshal. The West is growing, and I believe education must grow with it." She met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "Noble sentiment," he replied, though his tone suggested skepticism. Wallace, who had been silent until now, interjected, "We'll need to wire Hartford to confirm your credentials, of course. Standard procedure." Beatrice's heart stuttered. "Certainly, though it may take some time. The headmistress is traveling in Europe this summer." A convenient fiction that might buy her time. The marshal's eyes narrowed slightly, but Fleming seemed satisfied. "No matter," the mayor declared. "School term doesn't officially begin until September, but many parents would appreciate supervised activities for their children immediately. Consider yourself hired provisionally, Miss Taylor." Relief washed through her. "Thank you, gentlemen. I won't disappoint you." As the meeting concluded, Marshal Galloway lingered. "Miss Taylor," he said quietly when the others had departed, "Vulture City can be dangerous. There's a reason we don't see many single women of quality here." "I'm quite capable of taking care of myself, Marshal," she replied, bristling at his implication. "No doubt. But a word of advice: this town has secrets. Best not to dig too deeply." With a tip of his hat, he departed, leaving her to wonder whether his words were a warning or a threat. Over the next week, Beatrice settled into the small quarters attached to the schoolhouse. The building itself was weathered but sound, with rows of rough-hewn benches and a cracked slate board. She spent hours cleaning, organizing, and preparing lessons, determined to make the position her own before anyone could question her qualifications. Children began to appear first, just 3 curious faces peering through the windows, then a dozen attending her improvised summer sessions. She taught them reading and arithmetic in the mornings, then organized games and nature studies in the afternoons. Their parents paid in small coins, eggs, or fresh vegetables, grateful for the respite from childcare during the brutal summer heat. Beatrice kept to herself otherwise, avoiding the saloons and questionable establishments that comprised much of the town's social life. She was acutely aware of being watched by the townswomen who wondered about her background, by men who speculated about her virtue, and most unsettlingly, by Marshal Galloway, whose gaze she frequently felt from across the street. She was returning from the mercantile one afternoon, arms laden with paper and pencils purchased with her meager savings when disaster struck. The heel of her boot caught on an uneven board in the sidewalk, sending her sprawling. Supplies scattered everywhere, and worse, her ankle twisted painfully beneath her. "Damnation," she muttered, forgetting propriety in her distress. "That's quite a vocabulary for a schoolteacher," came a deep voice, and she looked up to find the marshal standing over her, expression caught between amusement and concern. "Marshal Galloway," she acknowledged stiffly, attempting to gather her belongings while maintaining her dignity. When she tried to stand, however, pain shot through her ankle, forcing her back down with a gasp. "You're hurt," he observed, crouching beside her. "Let me help you." "I'm perfectly fine," she insisted, though tears of pain threatened to betray her. A momentary stumble. He ignored her protest, gathering her scattered purchases with efficient movements. "Stubbornness won't mend that ankle, Miss Taylor. You need to get off it." "I can manage," she said through gritted teeth, even as she struggled to rise. Marshal Galloway sighed, then surprised her by setting down her belongings and meeting her eyes directly. "Actually, I need you to help me with something at the schoolhouse. Important matter concerning one of your students. I can't discuss it here on the street." Beatrice frowned, momentarily forgetting her pain. "What sort of matter? Private," he replied. "But I need your perspective, being educated and all." He offered his arm. "So if you wouldn't mind assisting me there." She realized what he was doing, framing his help as a request for hers, preserving her pride while solving the immediate problem. Reluctantly impressed by his perception, she accepted his arm, allowing him to support her weight as they gathered her things. "This doesn't mean I couldn't have managed alone," she informed him as they moved awkwardly down the street, the corner of his mouth quirked upward. "Never suggested otherwise, Miss Taylor." At the schoolhouse, he helped her to a chair, then knelt to examine her ankle with surprisingly gentle hands. "Sprained, not broken," he diagnosed. "You'll need to stay off it for a few days." "Impossible. I have classes to teach." "The children can survive a brief holiday," he countered, rising to fetch water from the barrel outside. Returning with a dampened cloth, he carefully wrapped her ankle, his competence suggesting this wasn't his first time treating such injuries. "You have medical training, Marshal?" she asked, watching him work. "Army surgeon's assistant for 2 years during the war," he replied. "Picked up a few things." She calculated quickly. "You would have been very young. 16 when I enlisted, old enough to carry a stretcher and follow orders." He secured the bandage with practiced efficiency. "You need ice to reduce the swelling." "And where exactly would I find ice in June in Arizona territory?" He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his stern features. "The saloon has an ice house. I'll bring some." "That won't be necessary. I'm sure Mrs. Abernathy next door can assist me." "Mrs. Abernathy left yesterday to visit her sister in Prescott." He stood, dusting off his hands. "Now, about that important matter I needed your help with." Beatrice folded her arms. "There is no important matter, is there? That was just a ruse to let me accept your assistance without feeling beholden." "You caught me," he admitted, not looking particularly repentant. "Though I do have a legitimate question, what exactly is a Boston lady with refined speech and expensive boots, faded as they may be, doing posing as a schoolteacher in a mining town like this?" Her blood ran cold. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." His voice remained conversational, but his eyes were shrewd. "Your references may fool Fleming and Wallace, but I spent time in Boston after the war. Hartford Ladies' Academy doesn't exist." Panic flared, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Are you calling me a liar, Marshal?" "I'm suggesting you have secrets." He studied her reaction. "Everyone has reasons for coming west. Some are running to something, others running from something. I'm just trying to figure out which you are. Perhaps I'm simply seeking honest work. Perhaps." He didn't sound convinced. "The thing is, Miss Taylor, I'm responsible for this town's safety. That includes protecting you, even if you're too proud to admit you might need it." "I don't need protection," she snapped. "What I need is for you to respect my privacy." He considered this, then nodded. "Fair enough. Your secrets are your own, unless they endanger others." He moved toward the door. "I'll bring that ice and some supper too. Don't try walking on that ankle." Before she could protest again, he was gone, leaving her alone with her throbbing ankle and growing anxiety. She'd underestimated Marshal Galloway. He was far more observant than she'd anticipated, and if he continued investigating her background, everything she'd worked for would unravel. By the time he returned with a cloth-wrapped bundle of ice and a covered plate of food, Beatrice had composed herself. She would need to be more careful, more convincing, and perhaps even consider moving on sooner than planned. "Mrs. Chen from the restaurant sent this," he said, setting down a plate of savory stew. "Said every growing teacher needs proper nourishment." "Please thank her for me," Beatrice replied stiffly, accepting the ice pack. "You know," Galloway remarked, leaning against her desk, "most folks would just say thank you." "Thank you," she echoed mechanically. He shook his head, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Has anyone ever told you that you make accepting help harder than it needs to be? I prefer self-reliance. Admirable quality, impractical at times." He pushed away from the desk. "I'll check on you tomorrow. Try to stay off that foot." After he left, Beatrice stared at the closed door, unsettled by their interaction. There was something disarming about Brent Galloway, a directness that cut through her carefully constructed facade. It was dangerous. She couldn't afford to trust anyone, least of all the town's lawmen. Yet as she ate the surprisingly flavorful stew, she found herself wondering about him. What had brought a former army medic to this remote mining settlement? How had a man who seemed capable of genuine kindness ended up in such a harsh profession? Questions she had no business asking, she reminded herself sternly. Her ankle improved faster than expected, largely because she ignored the marshal's advice and continued teaching, albeit seated at her desk rather than standing. 3 days after her fall, she was walking with only a slight limp, having fashioned a makeshift cane from a broomstick. Word came that the stage would arrive the following day, bringing mail and new arrivals. Beatrice tensed, knowing it might also carry responses to the inquiries about her credentials. She needed to establish herself more firmly before questions arose, which meant finding allies among the townspeople. That afternoon, she invited several mothers to discuss the upcoming school term. Over tea served in mismatched cups, she outlined her educational philosophy, emphasizing practical skills alongside traditional subjects. The women seemed impressed, particularly when she suggested adding domestic science classes for the older girls. "My Louisa can barely thread a needle, Mrs. Peterson confessed. Her father says schooling's making her impractical, but I say she needs both kinds of learning." "Exactly my thinking," Beatrice agreed. "Education should prepare children for the lives they'll lead." As the women departed, Martha Wilson, wife of the town doctor, lingered. A shrewd-eyed woman in her 40s, she had said little during the gathering. "Miss Taylor," she began, adjusting her shawl, "I hope you won't find me forward, but I've noticed you keep to yourself quite strictly." Beatrice tensed. "I believe teachers must maintain certain standards." "Understandable. However, isolation feeds speculation, and there's been plenty regarding your arrival." Her expression softened. "Sunday services at the church provide respectable social opportunity. You'd be welcome at our pew." The invitation surprised her. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I'll consider it. Do. And perhaps you might join us for dinner afterward. The Marshal often dines with us. He's practically family since he saved our James from drowning last spring." Mention of Galloway put her on guard. "That's very kind, but I insist," Mrs. Wilson said firmly. "A young woman needs connections in a place like this. The wrong sort are all too eager to offer friendship to newcomers." The warning was clear enough. Beatrice recognized that refusing might damage her standing with a prominent family. "Then I accept gratefully." Mrs. Wilson nodded, satisfied. "Excellent. Services begin at 10. She paused at the door. "You know, Marshal Galloway inquired about your welfare just yesterday, quite concerned about your ankle." "The Marshal seems concerned about many things," Beatrice replied neutrally. "He's a good man," Mrs. Wilson said. "Better than most realize. Good day, Miss Taylor." The conversation left Beatrice unsettled. Was the dinner invitation genuine kindness, or was Mrs. Wilson acting as the Marshal's proxy to investigate her further? Either way, she'd need to navigate Sunday carefully. The stage arrived on schedule the following morning, but to Beatrice's relief, brought no telegrams questioning her credentials. It did, however, deliver something unexpected: 3 new students, children of a mining engineer who had accepted a position at the Prosperity Mine. The eldest, a serious girl of 12 named Catherine, approached Beatrice after class. "Madam, is it true what they're saying? That you came here all alone with no family?" Beatrice considered her response carefully. "I'm quite independent, yes." "So am I," the girl declared with fierce determination. "I'm going to be a doctor someday, even though Pa says it's not proper for ladies." "Many improper ladies have made remarkable contributions to medicine," Beatrice replied, thinking of Elizabeth Blackwell. "Determination often matters more than propriety." Catherine's eyes widened. "That's what I think too. Will you teach me extra science? I brought my books from St. Louis." "I'd be delighted." Beatrice found herself smiling genuinely. "Perhaps Monday afternoons after regular classes." The girl's enthusiasm warmed something in Beatrice that had been cold for too long. This, at least, was honest work helping shape a young mind toward worthy ambition. For the first time since arriving in Vulture City, she felt a flicker of purpose beyond mere survival. Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, a reprieve from the summer heat. Beatrice dressed in her one good outfit, a rose-colored dress with modest bustle and lace collar, and arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style. Appearances mattered in a town this size, where every detail fed the gossip mill. The white clapboard church stood at the north end of town, its steeple the tallest structure in Vulture City. Inside, rough wooden pews filled quickly with miners and merchants in their Sunday best, a stark contrast to their weekday appearance. Beatrice spotted Mrs. Wilson waving her forward to a pew near the front, where Dr. Wilson and a teenage boy, presumably James, already sat. As she made her way down the aisle, she felt the weight of curious stares. A new face was still novelty here, especially one attached to the mysterious schoolteacher. She held her head high, refusing to show discomfort. Just as she reached the Wilsons' pew, Marshal Galloway entered through a side door, nodding to several parishioners before taking his place beside Dr. Wilson. Their eyes met briefly, and Beatrice was startled by the appreciative gleam in his gaze as it traveled over her Sunday attire. The service passed in a blur of hymns and sermon, her attention divided between maintaining proper decorum and acute awareness of the Marshal's presence mere feet away. When the congregation rose for the final blessing, she felt his hand at her elbow, steadying her as she stood. "Ankle still troubling you?" he murmured. "Only slightly," she replied, withdrawing from his touch as soon as possible, Outside, Mrs. Wilson took charge with cheerful efficiency. "We'll walk together, it's just 3 blocks to our home. Brent, offer your arm to Miss Taylor." These streets are still uneven in places. Trapped by politeness, Beatrice accepted the marshal's arm, noting the amused quirk of his lips as she did so. "This isn't necessary," she said under her breath. "I know," he replied equally quietly. "But refusing would upset Martha, and trust me, that's not a battle worth fighting." Despite her reservations, Beatrice found the Wilson home welcoming, a substantial 2-story house with actual glass windows and a small garden struggling against the arid climate. Inside, the furnishings spoke of Eastern refinement adapted to frontier practicality. "James, show Miss Taylor the parlor while we see to dinner," Mrs. Wilson instructed her son, a gangly youth who clearly found the task excruciating. "Yes," he mumbled, leading Beatrice to a modestly appointed sitting room before escaping with visible relief. Marshal Galloway followed, removing his hat and setting it on a side table. Out of his usual attire, dressed in a well-tailored dark suit without his gun belt, he looked less the intimidating lawman and more the gentleman. The transformation was disconcerting. "The Wilsons are good people," he said, breaking the awkward silence. "Martha's taken in half the strays in town at one time or another." "Is that what I am, Marshal? A stray?" He considered her question seriously. "No, strays are lost. You strike me as someone who knows exactly where she's going, even if the path isn't what others might expect." Before she could respond to this unsettlingly accurate assessment, Dr. Wilson entered, carrying a decanter of amber liquid. "Sherry for the lady, whiskey for us men," he announced genially. "Martha insists on civilization even in the wilderness." Conversation flowed more easily than Beatrice had expected. Dr. Wilson was well-read and traveled, eager to discuss developments in medicine and science. Mrs. Wilson proved knowledgeable about local affairs without descending into gossip. Young James, though initially silent, warmed considerably when Beatrice mentioned Catherine's interest in medicine. "Kathy Miller. She's the smartest kid in town," he declared with adolescent certainty. "Beat me in the spelling competition last winter in Prescott." Throughout the meal, Beatrice was conscious of Marshal Galloway's quiet observation. He spoke less than the others, but when he did, his comments were thoughtful and occasionally surprising, revealing education beyond what she'd assumed. "Miss Taylor, Doctor," Wilson said as they lingered over coffee, "my wife tells me you're incorporating practical sciences into your curriculum. Admirable innovation. Children here will face different challenges than those in eastern cities," she replied. "Their education should reflect that reality." "Precisely our thinking when we established the lending library," Mrs. Wilson interjected. "Brent donated quite a collection of books from his personal library." Beatrice couldn't hide her surprise. "You maintain a personal library, Marshal?" A hint of color touched his tanned face. "Reading passes the quiet nights. Brent's being modest," Dr. Wilson chuckled. "He holds a degree from Columbia. Could have practiced law back east, but preferred adventure." This revelation forced Beatrice to reevaluate her assumptions. A college-educated lawman was unexpected and potentially more dangerous to her deception. "How fortunate for Vulture City," she managed, mind racing with implications. Later, as the afternoon waned, Marshal Galloway offered to escort her home. Mrs. Wilson's knowing smile made refusal impossible without seeming ungrateful, so Beatrice found herself walking beside him through the quieter Sunday streets. "You seem troubled, Miss Taylor," he observed after they'd gone a block in silence. "Not troubled, contemplative." "About?" She decided honesty might serve better than evasion, at least partially. I'm reassessing my initial impressions of this town, and it's Marshal. He smiled slightly. Finding us not quite the backward frontier outpost you expected, perhaps, though appearances can be deceptive. Indeed, they can. His pace slowed. For instance, a woman with your bearing and education might ordinarily seek employment in more established communities, yet here you are in a dusty mining town teaching children who may never need to know proper elocution. The implied question hung between them. Beatrice tensed, preparing another deflection when commotion erupted from a saloon ahead. Shouting men spilled onto the street, fists flying. "Stay here," Galloway ordered, immediately striding toward the altercation. She watched as he waded into the fray, separating combatants with authoritative commands and, when necessary, physical force. The crowd dispersed quickly under his management, 2 men detained for further questioning while others slunk away. As the disturbance settled, Beatrice noticed a man observing from the shadows across the street, well-dressed, with the hard eyes of someone accustomed to having his way. When he caught her looking, he tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy that felt more threatening than polite. "Who is that man?" she asked when Galloway returned, brushing dust from his suit. He followed her gaze, expression hardening. "Sullivan, Edmund Sullivan, owns the largest gambling hall and several questionable establishments." His voice lowered. "Best avoided, especially by ladies. He seems to have taken an interest. Sullivan takes interest in anything new that might be profitable." His hand moved protectively to the small of her back, guiding her away. "Another reason you shouldn't be walking alone, especially near his territory." "I can handle unwanted attention," she said stiffly. "I don't doubt your capability, Miss Taylor, but Sullivan isn't just any threat. He has influence with territorial officials and a habit of removing obstacles permanently." He met her eyes directly. "Whatever your reasons for being in Vulture City, crossing his path would complicate them." The warning sent a chill through her. "Why tell me this?" "Because despite your determination to keep everyone at arm's length, I believe you're trying to build something worthwhile here." His expression softened momentarily. The children need a teacher who cares about their futures, even if her past isn't exactly what she claims. They reached the schoolhouse in uneasy silence. At the door, Beatrice paused. "Thank you for the escort, Marshal Brent," he corrected. "At least when I'm not wearing the badge." The invitation to familiarity unsettled her. "That wouldn't be appropriate." "Appropriate," he echoed with a hint of irony. "You cling to propriety like armor, Miss Taylor. I wonder what you're protecting underneath." "Good evening, Marshal," she said pointedly, retreating behind the schoolhouse door before he could respond. Later that night, unable to sleep, Beatrice sat at her small desk updating lesson plans by lamplight. The day had left her unsettled, not just because of Sullivan's predatory gaze or Galloway's warnings, but because of her own conflicted feelings. She had come to Vulture City with clear purpose: establish herself temporarily, earn enough money to move on to San Francisco where she might finally escape her past completely. Forming attachments was dangerous. Trusting anyone, especially a lawman with investigative inclinations, was foolhardy. Yet for the first time in months, she'd experienced moments of genuine connection with young Catherine's aspirations, with the Wilsons' hospitality, and most disturbingly, with Brent Galloway's perceptive understanding. The Marshal saw through her pretenses in ways that both frightened and intrigued her. "This changes nothing," she told herself firmly, closing her lesson book. "The plan remains the same." But as she finally drifted toward sleep, Beatrice couldn't escape the memory of those blue eyes that seemed to see past her carefully constructed facade to the truth she'd been running from for far too long. The following week brought sweltering heat that tested everyone's patience. Children fidgeted at their desks, ink dried too quickly on paper, and tempers flared throughout town. Beatrice persevered, moving lessons outdoors when possible and incorporating water games that taught science principles while cooling overheated students. Her ankle fully healed, she resumed exploring the town, though she took care to avoid the areas Galloway had indicated were Sullivan's domain. The marshal himself seemed unusually busy, riding out frequently with deputies to investigate reports of cattle rustling in the surrounding ranches. On Thursday afternoon, as she dismissed her students, Catherine lingered behind as had become their custom for additional science lessons. The girls' enthusiasm was infectious as they dissected a flower, identifying stamens and pistils. "Miss Taylor," Catherine asked as they worked, "is it true you're from Boston? My mother says Boston ladies are very refined." "I was born there, yes," Beatrice answered carefully. "Then why did you come here? It's so." The girl gestured vaguely at the dusty town visible through the window. "Sometimes change is necessary," Beatrice replied, "and there's value in building something new." Catherine considered this seriously. "Like when we moved from St. Louis after Papa lost his position." "Exactly. New beginnings require courage." Their discussion was interrupted by a commotion outside, raised voices, and the sound of running feet. Beatrice moved to the window, Catherine close behind, to see a group of men gathered in the street. At their center stood Marshal Galloway, facing a well-dressed man she recognized as Sullivan. "Stay here," she instructed Catherine, moving swiftly to the door. Outside, tension crackled in the air. Sullivan's voice carried clearly. "You're exceeding your authority, Marshal. My establishments operate within the law." "The law doesn't include press-ganging minors into debt slavery," Galloway replied evenly. "Those men are free to leave whenever they choose." Sullivan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "They're free to pay their debts first, standard business practice." "Charging a month's wages for a night's gambling and watered whiskey isn't standard anywhere decent." Galloway stood his ground, though Sullivan's men outnumbered him 3-1. Beatrice edged closer, drawn by concern despite her better judgment. Several townspeople had gathered to watch, including Dr. Wilson and the mercantile owner. "Perhaps you should consult Judge Harper about the legalities," Sullivan suggested silkily. "Oh, wait, he's a regular at my tables. Such a shame about his gambling habit." The implied threat hung in the air. Galloway's expression remained impassive, but Beatrice saw his hand shift slightly closer to his holstered gun. "The territorial governor might be interested too," Sullivan continued, "especially in how certain town officials are enforcing selective justice, perhaps even harboring fugitives from other jurisdictions." At this, Galloway's eyes narrowed fractionally. Sullivan, noting the reaction, smiled more broadly. His gaze drifted over the gathered crowd, lingering when he spotted Beatrice. "Ah, our new schoolteacher. A pleasure to finally make your acquaintance, Miss Taylor." He doffed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "I hope our marshal has been making you feel welcome. He's quite protective of newcomers, especially those with interesting histories." Beatrice felt blood drain from her face, but forced her expression to remain neutral. "I find Vulture City's welcome adequate, sir." "Merely adequate. We must remedy that. I'm hosting a social gathering Saturday evening, finest entertainment this side of Tucson. You must attend as my guest." Before she could refuse, Galloway interjected, "Miss Taylor already has commitments with the school board Saturday evening." Sullivan's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. "Another time, then. I'm a patient man." He turned back to Galloway. "We'll continue our discussion later, Marshal, when you're prepared to be reasonable." With a final nod to Beatrice that felt more like a threat than courtesy, Sullivan and his men departed, leaving unsettled silence in their wake. Dr. Wilson approached immediately. "Brent, that man's becoming more dangerous. The territorial representative arrives next week. Perhaps it's time to present our evidence." "Not yet," Galloway replied, his gaze following Sullivan's retreating figure. "We need more proof before risking direct confrontation." His attention shifted to Beatrice. "Miss Taylor, a word please." The crowd dispersed as they moved toward the schoolhouse. Beatrice remembered Catherine with a start and hurried inside, relieved to find the girl absorbed in examining plant specimens through a magnifying glass. "Catherine, you should head home now. Your mother will be worried." After the girl departed, Beatrice turned to face Galloway, whose expression had hardened into professional concern. "Sullivan's taken notice of you," he stated without preamble, "so it appears. It's not coincidence. He's been asking questions about you since Sunday." Alarm flickered through her. What sort of questions? The kind that suggest he's received information from outside Vulture City. His gaze was penetrating. "Is there something I should know, Miss Taylor? Something that might explain his particular interest?" The moment she dreaded had arrived sooner than expected. Denial seemed pointless, yet full confession was impossible. She chose her words carefully. "My past is complicated, Marshal, but I assure you I've broken no laws. That's not an answer. It's all I can offer." She straightened her shoulders. "If my presence is causing difficulties for the town, perhaps it would be best if I moved on. Running again." His question was gentle but direct. "I prefer to call it strategic relocation." Unexpectedly, he smiled. Stubborn to the last. The smile faded. "But no, I don't want you to leave. The children need you, and whatever Sullivan's game is, we don't concede to bullies." "We," she echoed. "This town protects its own, Miss Taylor, whether you want that protection or not." The assertion stirred complicated emotions. "I've managed alone for some time now. And admirably, I'm sure." He moved closer, his voice lowering. "But the fact remains Sullivan has resources we don't fully understand. His interest in you suggests he knows something I don't, and that puts both you and potentially this town at risk." She weighed her options quickly. Complete honesty would only create more problems, but perhaps partial truth might satisfy him. "I left Boston under difficult circumstances," she began cautiously. "A man of influence made certain allegations after I refused his advances. While false, they damaged my reputation irreparably." "And Denver," he prompted. She tensed. "How did you mentioned teaching there? Yet when I wired the school superintendent, they had no record of a Beatrice Taylor." Caught in the fabrication, she improvised. "I used a different name there, for obvious reasons." His expression revealed nothing. "So Sullivan might be connected to your Boston situation. It's possible. He has the same predatory quality." This much was honest, at least. Galloway considered her words, then nodded. "Thank you for telling me. It helps to understand what we're facing." Relief washed through her until his next words froze her blood. "Of course, I still need to know your real name, for your protection." She stepped back. "I've told you enough, Beatrice." The use of her first name startled her. "Trust works both ways. I'm asking as someone who wants to help, not as the marshal." "That distinction means little when they are the same person," she countered. Frustration flickered across his features. "You're determined to fight every battle alone, aren't you? Even when allies are offering themselves. Experience has taught me the wisdom of self-reliance, and the cost of isolation." He shook his head. "Sullivan won't stop digging, and unlike me, he doesn't care about your consent or dignity in the process." The warning struck home, but years of caution weren't easily overcome. "I appreciate your concern, Marshal, but my secrets remain my own until I choose otherwise." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "As you wish. But my offer stands when you're ready to accept help without seeing it as weakness. I'll be there." After he left, Beatrice sank into her chair, trembling slightly. The confrontation with Sullivan had shaken her more than she cared to admit. If he truly had connections to Boston, or had somehow discovered her real identity, everything she'd built here could crumble overnight. Worse, Galloway's interest had shifted from professional suspicion to something more personal, a concern that tempted her toward trust she couldn't afford. His perception troubled her, as did her own inexplicable impulse to confide in him despite all prudence. That night, Beatrice lay awake planning contingencies. If necessary, she could leave for Tucson on Saturday's stage, though her savings would barely cover the journey. The teaching position in San Francisco wouldn't be available until autumn, leaving her vulnerable in the interim. Yet the thought of fleeing again, starting over in yet another strange place, exhausted her. For all its dangers, Vulture City had begun to feel like somewhere she might belong. Catherine's eager intelligence, the Wilsons' kindness, even Galloway's frustrating perceptiveness, these connections tugged at her in ways she hadn't anticipated. One more week, she decided finally. If Sullivan makes no further moves, perhaps the danger is less immediate than it appears. But even as she made this resolution, Beatrice knew she was rationalizing. The truth she'd been running from for nearly a year wouldn't remain buried forever. No matter how far west she traveled, Friday morning dawned clear and hot. Beatrice rose early, determined to maintain normalcy despite her inner turmoil. She had just begun preparing the day's lessons when a sharp knock at the schoolhouse door startled her. Marshal Galloway stood outside, his expression grave. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "School begins in an hour," she replied, reluctant to invite him inside where rumors might start. "This won't wait." He handed her an official-looking telegram. This arrived on the overnight stage for Mayor Fleming. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded the paper. The message was brief, but devastating, regarding inquiry. "No Beatrice Taylor, graduated Hartford Academy. Stop suggest investigation into Alina Blackwell. Wanted Boston embezzlement charges. Stop description matches. Stop advised detainment pending authorities. Stop." Blood roared in her ears as her worst fears materialized in stark black type. "Where did you get this? Telegraph operator is a friend. Showed me before delivering to Fleming." His voice remained calm. "Is it true? Are you Alina Blackwell?" The name she'd abandoned nearly a year ago hung between them. Denial seemed pointless now. "The embezzlement charge is false. I was framed by the influential man who made advances, my father's former business partner." The truth, hidden for so long, spilled out in bitter fragments. "After my father died, he controlled the family assets as executor. When I discovered he'd been stealing from my mother's trust, he claimed I was the thief. His position in Boston society made his word unassailable. And your mother died 3 months after my father. Grief, the doctor said." The memory still burned. "I had no one to speak for me, no resources to fight the charges, so I ran." Galloway absorbed this, his expression unreadable. "Why not seek legal help? If you were innocent, Jefferson Harrington sits on the board of every bank in Boston," she interrupted. "His family practically owns the courts. My own lawyer suggested I'd receive fairer treatment if I—" She faltered. "If you what?" "If I agreed to marry him instead of facing trial." The humiliation of that moment still stung. Apparently a wife cannot testify against her husband, making the problem conveniently disappear. Understanding dawned in his eyes. So you fled instead, changed your name, moved west. Denver first, then here when I learned he had investigators searching Colorado. She met his gaze directly. I'm not a thief, Marshal. The only crime I've committed is using a false name to escape persecution. He was silent for a long moment, and Beatrice braced herself for the inevitable arrest, public humiliation, eventual return to Boston in chains to face Harrington's manufactured justice. Instead, Galloway folded the telegram deliberately and tucked it into his vest pocket. This creates complications. I imagine it does, she replied stiffly. When will you make the arrest? He looked genuinely startled. Arrest? I have no intention of arresting you. Hope flared briefly. But the telegram is concerning, yes, but also informative. He began pacing thoughtfully. Sullivan's sudden interest makes more sense now. The timing suggests he received information about your true identity, probably from sources in Boston. Harrington, she breathed. He must have connections here. More than connections. Sullivan's gambling empire requires Eastern investment. Men like your Harrington provide capital in exchange for certain considerations. The implications chilled her. So I've merely exchanged one powerful enemy for another. Not exactly. Galloway stopped pacing, his decision apparently made. Fleming won't see this telegram. As far as anyone official knows, Miss Beatrice Taylor remains our respected schoolteacher with impeccable credentials. Confusion replaced fear. Why would you do that? It's your duty to my duty, he interrupted firmly, is justice, not blind enforcement of corrupt accusations. If what you say is true, and I believe it is, then the real criminal is Harrington, not you. The unexpected support left her momentarily speechless. That's unusually flexible morality for a lawman. A smile touched his lips. I prefer to think of it as discernment. Law and justice don't always align perfectly. His expression grew serious again. But Sullivan remains a problem. If he's working with Harrington, he'll have more evidence than this telegram. Reality reasserted itself, dampening her brief relief. Then I should leave immediately. There's a stage tomorrow. Running isn't the answer this time, he countered. It would only confirm suspicions and make you easier to track with no protection. What alternative do you suggest? Wait for Sullivan to expose me publicly. I suggest, Galloway said with deliberate emphasis, that we fight back. Properly this time with allies and evidence. We. The word caught her by surprise again. Yes, we. He held her gaze steadily. Eleanor or Beatrice, if you prefer. I'm offering to help you clear your name. Not as a marshal doing his duty, but as someone who believes you deserve justice. The offer was so unexpected, so contrary to her experience of the past year, that suspicion flared automatically. Why? You barely know me. I know enough. His voice softened. I know you're brilliant with those children, patient with their questions, and determined to give them opportunities beyond what this town ordinarily offers. I know you maintain dignity despite difficult circumstances, and that your first instinct is always to stand on your own strength. He moved closer, his earnestness compelling. Most telling, I know that despite being hunted and betrayed, you've never become bitter or cruel. That speaks to character that deserves defending. Emotion threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. Even if I wanted your help, which I haven't said I do, how exactly would we clear my name against someone like Harrington from here? We start by understanding Sullivan's game. If he's Harrington's agent here, he'll have communications, possibly documentation. Galloway's expression turned thoughtful. Sullivan keeps an office above his largest saloon where he conducts private business. She realized where this was heading. You're suggesting breaking in. That's hardly legal, Marshal. I'm suggesting a strategic investigation, he corrected with the ghost of a smile. But first, we need to ensure your immediate safety. Sullivan knows or suspects your identity, which means he may move against you soon. The school board meeting tomorrow night, Beatrice realized. Fleming mentioned Sullivan might attend to discuss his donation to the school building fund. Perfect opportunity to expose you publicly. Galloway nodded grimly. We need to act before then. Despite years of self-reliance, Beatrice found herself considering his offer seriously. Alone, her options were limited to flight or eventual capture. With Galloway's help and his badge, different possibilities emerged. If, she said carefully, I were to accept your assistance, what exactly would that entail? Tonight after dark, we search Sullivan's office while he's occupied with his usual gambling operations. If he's communicating with Harrington, there will be evidence. His confidence was oddly reassuring. Meanwhile, you continue as normal. Any deviation from routine would alert him. The plan was audacious, risky, and offered her first real hope in months. Still, caution prevailed. And if we find nothing, or worse, if we're caught, then I'll help you leave safely with sufficient funds to start over somewhere beyond Harrington's reach. His commitment seemed absolute. But I don't intend to fail. Decision crystallized within her. Running had kept her safe temporarily, but never free. This man, this frustrating, perceptive man who saw through her defenses, was offering something she'd almost forgotten existed. An ally who believed in her innocence. Very well, she said, squaring her shoulders. I accept your help, Marshal Galloway. Brent, he corrected again with unexpected warmth. If we're breaking into Sullivan's office together, I think first names are appropriate. Despite everything, she found herself smiling. Beatrice, then. I've lived with the name long enough that it feels more real than a leaner now. Beatrice, he echoed, and something in the way he said it resonated in places long closed to hope or connection. Before she could examine that feeling too closely, practical matters intervened. I should prepare for class. The children will arrive soon, he nodded, moving toward the door. Teach as usual. I'll make arrangements and meet you behind the schoolhouse at 9 tonight. At the threshold, he paused. One question: did you actually teach in Boston? I did, she admitted. Not professionally, but I tutored at my father's academy for business daughters before. She trailed off. Before Harrington destroyed your life, Brent finished gently. Well, he won't succeed in doing it again. I promise you that. As the door closed behind him, Beatrice stood motionless, torn between fear of trusting too easily and the undeniable relief of finally sharing her burden. For better or worse, she had cast her lot with Brent Galloway, placing her future in hands other than her own for the first time since fleeing Boston. The school day passed in a blur of routine tasks performed by muscle memory while her mind raced with contingency plans. She found herself watching the clock, simultaneously dreading and anticipating the evening's risky venture. At dinner time, Mrs. Wilson unexpectedly appeared with a covered basket. I thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal, she explained. You work so hard with those children. The kindness nearly undid Beatrice's composure. That's very thoughtful, she managed, accepting the basket. Mrs. Wilson lingered, studying her with knowing eyes. Brent mentioned Sullivan has been troubling you. Alarm flared. What exactly did the marshal say? Only that Sullivan seems unreasonably interested in our new teacher and that we should keep watch. She patted Beatrice's hand reassuringly. Whatever's happening, dear, know that you have friends here, more than you realize. After Mrs. Wilson departed, Beatrice barely touched the excellent stew, her appetite diminished by mounting tension. As darkness fell, she changed into her darkest dress, pinned her hair securely, and prepared for whatever the night might bring. At precisely 9, a soft knock at the back door signaled Brent's arrival. He too had dressed for stealth dark clothing, no badge, his gun belt replaced with a smaller pistol tucked into his waistband. "Ready?" he asked simply. She nodded, heart pounding. "As I'll ever be." They moved through town via back alleys and service paths, avoiding the main street where saloons and gambling halls blazed with light and activity. Sullivan's establishment, the Grand Palace, stood 3 stories tall at the south end, its facade elaborately painted to suggest luxury beyond the town's usual standards. "His office is on the 3rd floor, rear corner," Brent whispered, as they paused in shadows across the street. Service stairs lead up from the kitchen. The cook leaves by 10, giving us a narrow window before the late-night food service begins. "You seem remarkably familiar with the layout," Beatrice observed, a fleeting smile. "I make it my business to know every building in town, especially those owned by men like Sullivan." They waited until a rowdy group of miners entered the front doors, then slipped around to the delivery entrance at the rear. The kitchen door was unlocked as Brent had predicted, the space temporarily empty as staff carried trays to the main floor. Moving with surprising stealth for his size, Brent led her through the hot, fragrant kitchen to a narrow staircase. They ascended quickly, freezing at a creaking board or distant voice, until they reached the 3rd floor. The hallway was dimly lit by a single gas lamp, revealing several doors, private gambling rooms. Brent mouthed silently, pointing to the first few, before indicating the corner room as their target. The door, unsurprisingly, was locked. Brent produced slender metal tools from his pocket and set to work with practiced movements that raised questions about his past Beatrice didn't have time to consider. Within moments, the lock yielded with a soft click. Sullivan's office was opulently furnished with imported furniture, oriental carpets, and oil paintings that seemed incongruous in a frontier mining town. A massive desk dominated the space, its surface meticulously organized with correspondence trays and leather-bound ledgers. "Start with those," Brent whispered, pointing to a filing cabinet while he moved toward the desk. "Look for Boston references, Harrington's name, or anything about new fugitives." They worked quickly, the sounds of gambling and music from below providing cover for their movements. Beatrice's fingers trembled slightly as she sifted through files, property deeds, loan agreements, contracts with liquor suppliers. The organization suggested Sullivan was more businessman than common criminal, making him all the more dangerous. "Here," Brent's voice was barely audible as he held up a small leather book. "His personal correspondence log." She joined him at the desk as he flipped through pages of neat handwriting, scanning dates and names. Halfway through, he stopped, finger marking an entry from 3 weeks earlier. J. Harrington, Boston inquiry regarding E. Blackwell, possible location Arizona Territory. Reward offered for confirmation and detention. A chill ran through her. "He's been hunting me for weeks, and found you apparently." Brent turned the page, revealing more recent entries. Confirmation sent to JH regarding subject in Vulture City. Payment expected upon successful detention. Territorial authorities notified discreetly. The telegram wasn't the beginning, Beatrice realized. It was just one part of his plan. Brent continued reading, his expression darkening. "There's more. He's arranged for a Pinkerton agent to arrive tomorrow specifically to identify and detain you during the school board meeting." The room seemed to tilt momentarily as the trap became clear. "Even if I ran now, they'd track you," Brent confirmed grimly. "Sullivan's thorough." He continued scanning the book, then suddenly stiffened. "Wait, this changes everything." He turned the book so she could see the entry, received confirmation from JH regarding Blackwell inheritance. Upon subject's return to Boston or confirmation of demise, H gains control of remaining trust valued at $75,000. Negotiating percentage for our assistance. My mother's trust, Beatrice whispered. He can't access it without me signing transfer papers or without proof of my death. Understanding dawned in Brent's eyes. That's why he framed you. If you're convicted as a felon, I lose inheritance rights under the trust conditions, she finished. My father was very specific about moral character clauses. And if you conveniently die before reaching Boston. Brent let the implication hang. Sullivan gets a percentage of my inheritance for making me disappear. The cold calculation behind it all struck her anew. They never intended a fair trial. Brent carefully copied the relevant entries into a small notebook, then replaced the ledger exactly as he'd found it. We have what we need: proof of conspiracy and financial motive, but it's not enough by itself. What more do we need? Corroboration. Independent evidence that Harrington embezzled from your family trust. He checked his pocket watch. We need to go. The late kitchen staff will arrive soon. They retraced their steps carefully, tension mounting with each creaking floorboard. At the bottom of the service stairs, Brent peered into the kitchen, then quickly pulled back. 2 men, he whispered. Not kitchen staff, Sullivan's security, they're checking the back entrance. Beatrice's pulse quickened. How did they know? They don't necessarily. Might be routine. He glanced around, spotting a narrow door. This way. The door opened to a small storage pantry. They slipped inside, pressed uncomfortably close among sacks of flour and preserved goods. Through the thin walls, they could hear the security men moving through the kitchen, one complaining about being pulled from his regular duties. Sullivan's jumpy tonight, one voice said. Ordered extra checks of all exits. That Boston business has him worked up, the other replied. Big money at stake if he delivers the schoolteacher. Beside her in the darkness, Brent's body tensed. Beatrice held her breath, straining to hear more, but the voices moved away toward the main floor. They're suspicious, she whispered. We need another way out. Brent's breath was warm against her ear. Service window in the pantry. Leads to the alley. His arm brushed hers as he reached past to locate the small window. It'll be tight, but we can manage. The window protested with a groan as he worked it open, making them both freeze momentarily. When no one came to investigate, Brent helped Beatrice up first. The opening was indeed narrow, requiring undignified wriggling that would have mortified her under different circumstances. She dropped quietly to the alley below, then watched anxiously as Brent somehow folded his larger frame through the same opening, landing beside her with surprising grace. Now what? She asked as they retreated deeper into the shadows. We separate, he decided. Less conspicuous. You return to the schoolhouse. I'll circle through town to make sure we weren't followed, then meet you there in an hour. And tomorrow, his expression was resolute in the dim light. Tomorrow we take the offensive. Sullivan expects a frightened woman he can intimidate at the meeting. Instead, he'll face us both with evidence. The plan terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. That's extremely risky. So is letting him win. Brent's hand found hers briefly. Trust me, Beatrice. By tomorrow night, you'll no longer need to look over your shoulder. With that promise lingering between them, they parted ways at the edge of the alley. Beatrice moved quickly through back routes to the schoolhouse, constantly alert for followers. The night remained still except for distant piano music and occasional laughter from the saloons. Inside her quarters, she paced restlessly, reviewing what they'd discovered. The truth was simultaneously validating and terrifying proof of her innocence, but also confirmation that powerful men were conspiring to silence her permanently. When Brent finally arrived, his expression was troubled. "Sullivan's men are searching the town. They may suspect something." "What changed? We were careful. Not sure." He ran a hand through his hair, disheveled from his hurried return. "But it means we can't wait for the school board meeting. Whatever we do has to happen sooner." "How soon?" "Dawn." His decision came swiftly. "I'll arrange for Dr. Wilson to take our evidence to the territorial judge in Prescott immediately. Meanwhile, I'll confront Sullivan directly with what we know." Alarm flared. "That's too dangerous. Sullivan has men everywhere." "Which is why you'll be somewhere safe, the church. Reverend Parker will keep you hidden until we know it's over." She bristled at being sidelined. "This is my fight, too." "Precisely why you can't be involved directly." Brent's voice softened. "Sullivan wants you silenced, Beatrice. I won't risk your safety when we're this close to clearing your name." Logic battled with pride as she considered his plan. "And if something goes wrong, if Sullivan realizes what we know, then you'll take the morning stage with enough evidence to seek proper legal help in California." He produced an envelope from his pocket. "This contains copies of Sullivan's records and my sworn statement as a federal marshal. It also contains this." He opened the envelope to reveal a substantial amount of money, enough to reach San Francisco and hire a reputable lawyer. The gesture left her momentarily speechless. "I can't accept that." "Actually, I need you to," Brent replied, using the same strategy that had worked when they first met. "If something happens to me, you're the only one who can ensure Harrington and Sullivan face justice. I need to know you have the resources to do that." She recognized the tactic, but found herself smiling despite the circumstances. "Still framing your help as something you need from me. Is it working?" The hint of teasing in his tone belied the seriousness of their situation. "Perhaps." She accepted the envelope reluctantly. "But I prefer the plan where nothing happens to you." "That's my preference, too." His expression sobered. "Get some rest if you can. I'll return before dawn to escort you to the church." After he left, rest proved impossible. Beatrice packed a small bag with essentials, prepared for either outcome. As she worked, she realized how much had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, she'd been alone with her secrets and fears. Now, someone fought alongside her, someone who believed her worthy of justice. The realization brought unexpected emotion welling up. For nearly a year, she'd maintained rigid self-sufficiency, refusing help even when offered. Yet Brent had somehow bypassed those defenses, not by undermining her independence, but by respecting it, framing his assistance as collaboration rather than rescue. More unsettling still were the feelings emerging beneath her practical considerations. Attraction to the Marshal had been something she'd ruthlessly suppressed as dangerous distraction. Now, with barriers of secrecy removed, she could no longer deny the connection forming between them, a connection that frightened her almost as much as Sullivan's threats. True to his word, Brent returned before first light, his expression grave. "Change of plans. Sullivan's men are watching the schoolhouse." "How do you know?" "Spotted them during my patrol. 2 men in the alley behind the mercantile, perfect view of your door." He moved to the window, carefully checking sight lines. "We need to leave now before full light." "The church is across open ground," Beatrice observed. "They'd see us immediately." "Which is why we're not going to the church." Brent's voice lowered. "There's a cellar beneath the marshal's office, secure, with a separate exit to the ravine behind town. You'll wait there while I deal with Sullivan." The change increased her anxiety. "What about Dr. Wilson?" "The evidence?" "Already handled. He left for Prescott an hour ago with everything we found." Brent checked his gun methodically. Once Sullivan realizes the territorial authorities have been notified, his options narrow considerably, or become more desperate, she countered. That's why you need to be somewhere unexpected and secure. He offered his hand. Ready. We'll leave through the classroom window, less visible from their position. The pre-dawn air held desert coolness that would vanish with sunrise. Moving in deepest shadow, they skirted buildings and used service alleys, freezing at any sound. Twice they diverted their route to avoid Sullivan's men patrolling the streets. The marshal's office sat dark and quiet at the north end of town. Brent unlocked the rear door silently, ushering Beatrice inside and relocking it behind them. The office itself was Spartan but orderly: a desk, filing cabinet, gun rack, and cells at the rear. A trapdoor behind the desk revealed stone steps descending into darkness. Not the most comfortable accommodation, Brent apologized, lighting a lantern, but secure. The only keys are in my possession. The cellar was surprisingly large, evidently predating the current building. Rough stone walls supported massive timber beams, creating a space that felt more like a bunker than a simple basement. A cot occupied one corner, a small table and chair another. Wait here until I return, Brent instructed, setting the lantern on the table. There's water and provisions sufficient for a day. If I haven't returned by noon, use the tunnel. He indicated a low archway at the far end. It emerges in the ravine about 50 yards from the Methodist mission. Sister Agnes will help you reach the stage depot in Wickenburg. The detailed contingencies alarmed her. You're expecting serious trouble. I'm preparing for possibilities, he corrected gently. Sullivan is cornered, which makes him dangerous. But with the evidence already on its way to the territorial judge, his time is limited. Beatrice studied his face in the lantern light, memorizing details she hadn't previously allowed herself to notice: the small scar at his temple, the laugh lines that suggested a lighter side rarely displayed, the intensity in eyes that saw too much. Be careful, she said simply. Always am. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. When this is over, Miss Taylor, I believe you owe me dinner at the Wilsons, without the pretense of propriety getting in the way. The casual reference to a future beyond the immediate crisis touched her deeply. Are you asking me to dinner, Marshal Galloway? I believe I am, Miss Taylor. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them: possibility, promise, potential too fragile to name directly. Then the moment broke as noise from the street above signaled the town awakening. Brent's expression shifted back to professional determination. I should go. Sullivan will expect me on my usual morning patrol. Brent, she called as he reached the stairs. When he turned, words failed her momentarily. Thank you for believing me when no one else would. Easiest decision I've made in years, he replied softly, then climbed the stairs, closing the trapdoor behind him. Alone in the cellar, Beatrice settled into watchful waiting. The space was indeed secure, but also oppressive in its isolation. She could hear muffled sounds from above as the office came to life: deputies reporting, citizens bringing morning complaints, the rhythm of a small town's law enforcement. Hours passed with excruciating slowness. She tried reading a book left on the table, a well-worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, with Brent's name inscribed inside, but couldn't concentrate. The story of wrongful imprisonment and revenge struck too close to her current circumstances. Near what she estimated was mid-morning, the sounds above changed character: multiple boots crossing the floor, raised voices, the unmistakable tone of confrontation. She moved closer to the trapdoor, straining to hear details, but could only make out fragments. Illegal search. A voice that might be Sullivan's. Federal jurisdiction. Brent's voice, measured but firm. Mistake that will cost you. followed by what sounded like a threat, more movement, then silence. Had they left? Was Brent still above? The uncertainty gnawed at her as another hour crawled past. Then gunshots. Multiple reports in rapid succession, followed by shouting and running feet. Beatrice froze, heart pounding, unable to determine direction or distance. More shots followed, these seeming further away, perhaps on the main street. Every instinct urged her to investigate, to know what was happening, but Brent's instructions had been explicit. The cellar was her safety until he returned or noon arrived. She checked her watch, 11:15. 45 minutes, that might as well be eternity. When the trapdoor finally opened, Beatrice had the small derringer from her reticule aimed and ready. Relief flooded her as Brent's face appeared, then transformed to alarm at the blood staining his left shoulder. "You're hurt," she exclaimed, rushing to help as he descended the stairs. "Flesh wound," he dismissed, though his pallor suggested otherwise. Sullivan's men opened fire on Main Street. 2 deputies injured, one of Sullivan's men dead, and Sullivan barricaded in his saloon with hostages. Brent sank onto the cot, allowing her to examine his injury. "We need to move you immediately. The situation's deteriorating faster than anticipated." The bullet had torn through muscle at the shoulder, missing bone but leaving a jagged wound that bled steadily. Beatrice tore strips from a clean towel, creating a makeshift bandage. "You need a doctor." "Later. Right now, we need to get you safely away from town," he grimaced as she tightened the bandage. "Sullivan knows we have evidence against him. He's demanding we turn over the Blackwell woman and all documentation in exchange for the hostages." Fear constricted her throat. "Who are the hostages?" "Saloon girls, a few customers, and Catherine Miller." His expression reflected her horror. "She was passing the saloon on her way to bring you a gift, some plant specimens she'd collected. The knowledge that an innocent child was endangered because of her struck Beatrice like physical pain. We have to help her. My deputies are establishing a perimeter. The Territorial Ranger Detachment has been summoned from Prescott, but they are hours away." Brent stood, testing his injured arm with a wince. "Sullivan's men are watching all roads out of town. Our best chance is the tunnel get you to Wickenburg, then on to Prescott where you'll have protection until the judge reviews our evidence. And abandon Catherine. I can't do that." Determination crystallized within her. "Sullivan wants me. Perhaps we can negotiate." "Absolutely not." Brent's voice hardened. "The moment he has you, you become expendable. More than that, a liability who can testify against him and Harrington." "There must be something," she broke off as realization struck. "The telegram. The original telegram from Boston. What about it?" "You said it mentioned Eleanor Blackwell wanted on embezzlement charges, but nothing about the inheritance or Harrington's involvement." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "As far as the authorities know officially, you're just a fugitive from justice." "Exactly." "Sullivan knows the truth, but the telegram doesn't reveal the conspiracy." Her mind raced ahead. "What if we use that? Let Sullivan believe I'll surrender to official custody rather than to him." Brent considered this carefully. Creating division between Sullivan and the law, it could work. But immensely dangerous for you. Less dangerous than letting a child die because of me. Her decision was made. "I'll offer myself in exchange for Catherine, but insist on surrender to territorial authorities only, not to Sullivan's custody." "Sullivan won't agree easily. He needs you silenced before the truth about Harrington emerges. Then we force his hand." Determination replaced fear. "We make it public here now in front of the town. Sullivan thrives on secrecy and shadows. Let's bring everything into the light." The plan took shape quickly between them, audacious, risky, but offering their best chance to save Catherine while exposing the conspiracy. As they worked through details, Beatrice felt a strange calm replacing her earlier panic. For the first time since fleeing Boston, she would stop running and stand her ground. "You understand what you're risking?" Brent asked when they'd finished. "If this goes wrong, I understand perfectly," she assured him. "But I'm tired of letting men like Harrington and Sullivan dictate my fate through fear and manipulation. Whatever happens, I choose this." His expression shifted to something like pride mingled with concern. "I still don't like putting you in danger." "I believe your exact words were that I'm stubborn to the last," she reminded him with forced lightness. "Consider this proof." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Stubborn, brave, and brilliant, a formidable combination. Within the hour, they were ready. Brent's deputy delivered the necessary items through the tunnel entrance, avoiding Sullivan's watchers. The town had largely emptied as news of the standoff spread, citizens barricading themselves in homes and businesses away from the main street. Brent helped Beatrice adjust the final element of their plan, his own spare marshal's badge pinned to her bodice. "Deputy Marshal Taylor," he said with surprising solemnity. "Temporary appointment under federal emergency provisions." "Is that actually legal?" she questioned. "Legal enough for our purposes," he replied, checking his reloaded pistol one final time. "Ready," she nodded, squaring her shoulders. "Ready." They emerged not through the office but via the tunnel, circling behind buildings to approach the main street from an unexpected direction. The Grand Palace Saloon stood in artificial isolation amid the deserted thoroughfare, armed men visible at windows and on the balcony. From their position behind the bank, Brent raised a speaking trumpet borrowed from the volunteer fire brigade. "Sullivan. Marshal Galloway requesting parley regarding your demands." A moment passed before Sullivan himself appeared on the balcony, rifle in hand. "State your terms, Marshal." "I have Alina Blackwell in custody. She's willing to discuss surrender in exchange for the Miller girl." Sullivan's surprise was visible even at distance. He conferred briefly with someone inside before responding. "Send her out where we can see her." Brent looked to Beatrice, who nodded her readiness. Together they stepped into view, Brent slightly behind her, his gun not drawn but hand ready at his holster. "I'm here, Sullivan," she called, voice stronger than she felt. "Release Catherine unharmed, and I'll surrender myself to proper legal authorities." "How do I know you're really Blackwell?" Sullivan countered. "Jefferson Harrington sends his regards," she replied clearly. "Though I doubt he'll share the inheritance when I'm gone. Men like him rarely honor agreements with their tools." The reference to their private arrangement visibly startled Sullivan. "Come forward alone and I'll release the girl." "Not alone," Brent interjected. "And not to you. Miss Blackwell surrenders to territorial justice only, with witnesses to ensure proper procedure." Sullivan's expression darkened. "This isn't negotiable, Marshal." "The woman for the child. Direct exchange." "Here's my counter-offer," Beatrice called. "I'll come forward with Marshal Galloway. You send Catherine out simultaneously. I'll surrender officially, with the town as witness that I'm in lawful custody for transport to territorial authorities in Prescott." The public nature of the arrangement clearly disturbed Sullivan, whose power relied on manipulation behind closed doors. He disappeared inside briefly, presumably consulting with his men, before returning with a new proposal. "The girl for Blackwell. Exchange in the middle of the street. You can witness, Marshal, but from a distance. Once I have confirmation she's who she claims, the girl goes free." Beatrice glanced at Brent, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. This was as good as they were likely to get. "Agreed," she called. "But I want to see Catherine now, proof she's unharmed." Sullivan gestured, and Catherine was brought to the balcony, looking frightened but physically unharmed. The sight strengthened Beatrice's resolve. Whatever happened to her, the child would be safe. "Walk forward slowly," Brent murmured. "Remember the signal." They had advanced perhaps 10 paces when movement at the south end of the street caught Beatrice's attention. A group of riders approached at speed, 7 or 8 men in territorial ranger uniforms, led by Dr. Wilson. Sullivan noticed too, his expression contorting with rage. "It's a trap," he shouted to his men. "Kill her now, kill them all." Everything happened with disorienting speed. Sullivan raised his rifle toward Beatrice. Brent shoved her roughly aside as he drew his own weapon. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions simultaneously. Beatrice hit the ground hard, dust filling her lungs as bullets whined overhead. Through the chaos, she saw Sullivan's men retreating inside the saloon, firing wildly at the approaching rangers. Brent crouched beside her, returning fire with precision despite his injured shoulder. "The tunnel entrance," he urged between shots. "Get back to safety, Catherine," she protested, scanning desperately for the girl amid the mayhem. As if summoned by her concern, the saloon's front doors burst open. Catherine bolted outside, running blindly toward the street while Sullivan's remaining men focused on the rangers. Without hesitation, Beatrice broke cover, sprinting toward the terrified child. Behind her, she heard Brent's shout of alarm, followed by covering fire as he attempted to protect her mad dash. She reached Catherine in the middle of the street, wrapping protective arms around the girl's slight frame. "I've got you," she promised, turning to shield her from stray bullets. "You're safe now." But safety remained yards away across open ground. Sullivan appeared at the doorway, face contorted with fury as he spotted them. "You won't escape me, Blackwell," he snarled, raising his pistol. Time seemed to slow as Beatrice faced death directly. She twisted, positioning herself between Sullivan and Catherine, a final defiant act of protection. The shot that came wasn't Sullivan's. From somewhere to her left, a single rifle report cracked the air. Sullivan jerked backward, a look of surprise replacing rage as he collapsed in the doorway. Hands pulled Beatrice and Catherine toward cover, Brent reaching them at last, half dragging them behind an overturned wagon as the firefight continued around them. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, checking them both with frantic hands. "We're all right," Beatrice assured him, still clutching Catherine tightly. "Who shot Sullivan?" "Territorial Ranger," Brent confirmed, peering over their shelter to assess the situation. "They're clearing the building now. It's almost over." Within minutes, the shooting stopped. Sullivan's men, deprived of leadership and facing overwhelming force, surrendered quickly. Catherine was reunited with her hysterical parents, who had arrived with the crowd gathering at safe distance. As the ranger captain secured the scene, Dr. Wilson hurried to check Brent's wound, which had reopened during the confrontation. "You're lucky it's not worse," he scolded, rushing into gunfire with an existing injury, typical Galloway recklessness. "Is Sullivan dead?" Beatrice asked quietly. "Very," the doctor confirmed. "Clean shot through the heart. The Rangers arrived just in time, it seems." The ranger captain approached, a stocky man with a weathered face and pragmatic demeanor. "Marshal Galloway, we received your deputy's urgent message about hostages, but Dr. Wilson's information suggested larger concerns." "Captain Morris, meet Miss Beatrice Taylor, also known as Alina Blackwell," Brent said formally. "She has quite a story to share about Boston corruption reaching all the way to Arizona territory." The captain studied her thoughtfully. "The telegram from Boston mentioned embezzlement charges." "False charges," Brent interjected firmly. "We have evidence that Miss Blackwell was framed by a man named Jefferson Harrington, who conspired with Sullivan to silence her and steal her inheritance. Morris considered this. Serious allegations. You have documentation. En route to Judge Hollister in Prescott with my earlier messenger, Brent confirmed, including Sullivan's own records confirming the conspiracy. Then I suggest we all proceed to Prescott immediately, Morris decided. Miss Blackwell will remain in protective custody until Judge Hollister reviews the evidence. I'll accompany her, Brent stated, in a tone that invited no argument. After Dr. Wilson treats that shoulder properly, Morris amended, with the authority of a man accustomed to command. As the crowd dispersed, and order gradually returned to Vulture City, Beatrice found herself in the doctor's office watching Wilson stitch Brent's wound. The events of the day had left her drained yet strangely exhilarated, the burden of constant fear finally lifting after nearly a year of running. You realize this isn't over, Brent said quietly when the doctor stepped away. Harrington still has influence in Boston, but no longer over me, she replied with newfound confidence. With Sullivan's records and official investigation, the truth has a fighting chance. More than a chance. His hand found hers, warm and reassuring. I meant what I said about accompanying you to Prescott, and beyond if you'll permit it. The implication stirred emotions she'd kept carefully contained. Beyond, Boston if necessary, San Francisco if you prefer. Wherever clearing your name completely requires. His gaze held hers steadily. I told you once that I believe you deserve justice. I still do. And your duties here. Deputy Simmons has been ready for promotion for months. A smile touched his lips. Besides, I find I've developed interests beyond Vulture City. The physician in her wondered if his forwardness stemmed from blood loss or medication. The woman in her hoped otherwise. Are you always this impulsive, Marshal Galloway? Only when I encounter someone worth being impulsive for, he replied with unexpected earnestness. Someone stubborn enough to refuse help even when she needs it, brave enough to face killers to save a child, and honest enough to risk everything for truth. Doctor. Wilson returned before she could formulate a response, announcing that the Ranger escort was prepared to depart for Prescott within the hour. The captain's offered his personal wagon for you both, given the marshal's injury, quite comfortable by territorial standards. As they prepared to leave, townspeople gathered to bid farewell. Catherine Miller presented Beatrice with a carefully pressed flower. For luck, she whispered, hugging her teacher fiercely. You're the bravest lady I ever saw. Mrs. Wilson embraced her warmly. You'll return once this is settled, I hope. The children need their teacher. And perhaps the teacher needs them too, Beatrice admitted, surprised by how much the thought of leaving affected her. This town she'd chosen for temporary sanctuary had somehow become meaningful in ways she hadn't anticipated. The journey to Prescott passed more comfortably than Beatrice expected, despite Brent's obvious discomfort from his wound. They talked more freely than ever before, sharing histories long kept private. She learned about his family in New York, his law studies interrupted by war, his disillusionment with Eastern justice systems that favored wealth over truth. So you came west to find fairer application of the law, she observed as they watched sunset paint the distant mountains, and eventually found that even here, justice sometimes needs assistance. He adjusted his position with a wince. What about you? After this is resolved, what do you want? The question caught her by surprise. For so long, survival had been her only goal. I'm not sure, she admitted. Teaching has been unexpectedly rewarding, building something positive after so much destruction. You're good at it. Those children adore you. His expression grew thoughtful. Whatever you decide, I hope you'll allow me to be part of it. The directness of his statement both alarmed and thrilled her. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he repeated his earlier assertion. "The rest is just details to discover over time." In Prescott, events moved with surprising speed. Judge Hollister, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for integrity, reviewed their evidence thoroughly. Sullivan's records, combined with telegraphic inquiries to multiple sources, painted a damning picture of Harrington's manipulation of Boston's legal system. By week's end, the judge issued formal findings. The embezzlement charges against Eleanor Blackwell were dismissed for lack of credible evidence and probable witness tampering. More significantly, he ordered investigation into Harrington's management of the Blackwell estate, freezing all transactions pending review. "It's not complete vindication," Brent cautioned as they read the judge's order together in the Territorial Administration building. "Harrington will fight this." "But it's a beginning," Beatrice replied, feeling lighter than she had in months. "For the first time, someone with authority has acknowledged the possibility I was wronged, more than possibility." Judge Hollister is sending his findings to the governor with recommendation for federal investigation into Harrington's banking practices. Pride colored his voice. "Your courage made this possible." "Our courage," she corrected softly. "I wouldn't have found the strength to stop running without you." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability beneath the lawman's confidence. "Does that mean you might consider staying in Arizona territory, perhaps in a certain mining town that desperately needs a qualified teacher?" The question contained others unspoken but clearly felt between them. Beatrice considered her response carefully, aware that her answer would shape more than just her geographic future. "I believe I might," she said finally, "on one condition." "Name it." "That a certain marshal stops treating me as someone who needs rescue and continues treating me as a partner." She met his gaze steadily. "I've spent too long alone to settle for anything less than equal footing." His smile was answer enough, but his words confirmed it. "Miss Taylor, I wouldn't dare offer anything less. In fact, I find I rather need your particular brand of stubborn determination in my life." "Still framing it as something you need from me," she teased. "Always," he admitted without shame, "because it happens to be true." 2 months later, Beatrice stood before her classroom in Vulture City, watching her students demonstrate science principles to their parents at the term's opening exhibition. The schoolhouse had been improved with fresh paint and new windows, funded partly by Sullivan's assets seized during the ongoing investigation. Catherine Miller beamed with pride as she explained her project on desert plant adaptation, confident in a way that reminded Beatrice of herself at that age, before life's complications had intervened. The girl caught her eye and smiled knowingly, glancing toward the back of the room where Marshal Galloway stood observing the proceedings with undisguised admiration. Their return to Vulture City had been triumphant, the town welcoming back both its teacher and its marshal with genuine celebration. News from Boston continued to develop in their favor. Harrington faced multiple investigations. The Blackwell Trust had been placed under court supervision, and Eleanor's inheritance remained protected pending final resolution. More importantly, Beatrice had found something she hadn't expected when she first arrived in this dusty mining town: community. The Wilsons had become family, her students a daily joy, and the townspeople allies rather than potential threats. And then there was Brent, whose patient courtship had become the subject of gentle town gossip. He had respected her need for independence while making no secret of his admiration. Their professional collaboration had deepened into something more profound: mutual respect that formed the foundation for deeper feelings. As the exhibition concluded and parents collected children for home, Brent approached her desk. "Impressive display, Miss Taylor. The school board is extremely satisfied with their investment." "High praise indeed, Marshal." She gathered her materials, aware of Mrs. Wilson's knowing smile as she ushered the last children outside, deliberately leaving them alone. "I was hoping you might join me for dinner," he continued, more tentatively than his official tone. "There's something I'd like to discuss." "Another conspiracy requiring investigation," she teased, "something more personal." He offered his arm in the formal manner that had become their private joke, her initial resistance to assistance transformed into mutual support. "Actually, I find I need your opinion on a matter of some importance." She accepted his arm, recognizing the familiar pattern of their early interaction. "Always framing requests as things you need from me." "Only because it's true," he replied seriously. "I do need you, Beatrice. Your perspective, your determination, your company." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Your partnership in all things." Understanding dawned slowly. "Marshal Galloway, are you making me a proposal of some kind?" "I believe I am, Miss Taylor." His voice held certainty despite the question in his eyes. "Not because you need saving, but because we're better together than apart. I've known it since you refused my help with that twisted ankle." Joy bubbled up unexpectedly, deeper and more genuine than anything she'd felt since before her parents' deaths. "I may require convincing," she replied, though her expression betrayed her answer. "I'm prepared to present extensive evidence," he assured her, offering his hand. As they walked together through the town that had become home, Beatrice reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this moment. She had arrived in Vulture City, running from the past, too proud to accept help from anyone. Now she moved toward the future with a partner who had never tried to diminish her strength, only to complement it. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes needing someone else isn't weakness. Sometimes it's simply recognition that we're stronger together." "Precisely what I've been trying to tell you," Brent replied with satisfaction. "Though I must admit, your stubborn self-reliance was the first quality that captivated me. And here I thought it was my teaching skills. Those two." His smile held promise of all they might build together. "But mostly, it was watching someone stand alone against impossible odds, determined to forge her own path regardless of obstacles." "Not alone anymore," she reminded him, her hand finding his. "No," he agreed, fingers intertwining with hers. "Not alone at all." The Arizona sunset painted the sky in spectacular color. As they walked toward the future neither had imagined, when fate first brought them together, a future built on truth, justice, and the quiet strength found in accepting that sometimes the bravest act is allowing someone else to stand beside you, not as rescuer, but as equal partner in all of life's battles.